Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. If you've ever been to an antique mall, you've probably seen some antique quilts. I saw this at an antique store and it really stood out to me, this antique quilt. It's teal and white, which I really like, that two-color combination. Also, turquoise is kind of my favorite color. I took these pictures of the quilt so that hopefully I could try and recreate it. I thought it would be a lot of fun to try and make this. I tried to fit this quilt into something in my Encyclopedia of Pieced Quilt Patterns, 3rd edition. I've got a link in the description to that book. The closest thing I found was Jacob's Ladder and similar blocks to that. But when I started drawing out the design on the pictures, it wasn't coming out exactly perfect, like a perfect Jacob's Ladder block, and not all of the blocks were identical. I wanted to get the look of this quilt without it being a Jacob's Ladder block with sashing. What I ultimately decided to do is what I'm going to show you today. I decided to make this a quilt of reverse 6 patches. Well, let's get started and I'll take you through my process. First, I picked out 2 charm packs that I have in my stash. I'm really trying to use up some of my overstash. I have one that's all beige and one that's all navy, and I thought, okay, I'm going to use these 2 charm packs and I'm going to make this quilt. It won't be full size, but it will make a nice baby quilt. The first thing I did was a little bit of sorting, not too much, but I need half of my beige to make 4 patches, and I need the other half of my beige to make half square triangles, and the same for the navy. I'm going to try and do as much chain piecing as I can while I assemble these blocks. To make the half square triangles, the first thing I need to do is draw a diagonal line on half of my beige squares. I set those aside and started working on my 4 patches. So to make a 4 patch, what I'm going to do here is put a navy right sides together with a beige square. These 2 charm packs are different manufacturers, so they're a little bit different. That's okay. I'm going to be squaring up the 4 patches and the half square triangles before I assemble my 6 patch. Let's skip ahead to the end of these 4 patches. I did not break my chain yet. I decided to keep that chain going and started stitching the half square triangles. So I'm going to take a beige with the line drawn on the wrong side. I'm going to put that right sides together with my navy, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from that line. Here's a close-up of my little 1/4 inch foot here, and I can show you why you don't want to have that on when you're doing half square triangles like this. See, it just, that little guide grips the fabric and bunches it up. So I went ahead and stitched this first line, then I swapped out my 1/4 inch foot for a different foot. Well, I had the right idea, but I forgot to move my needle. So the stitches that I ended up with were off. Those first 2 blocks I had to restitch, pick out those seams, restitch them to the 1/4 inch mark instead of, I think they ended up about a 1/2 inch away from the line. I separated the chain after I was done, and I went back through and stitched the opposite side. On the half square triangles, it was the opposite side of that diagonal line. For the 4 patch blocks, I just had to stitch the opposite side from that first line, just right along the side, a 1/4 inch away from the edge. For the half square triangle blocks, I just have to cut on the line that I drew, and then I'll be pressing those open to the dark side. For the 4 patch blocks, I'm just cutting those in half with the lines oriented left side and right side, and then I'm just cutting right down the middle. Now I'm going to go through and press all these units as they are so far, press them to the dark side. I usually start out pressing these units one at a time, but I quickly start doing more than one at a time. I'll let my iron sit there on the first one while I open up the next one, and I'll keep going. That kind of speeds it up for me a little bit. Once I got to the end of the 4 patch units, I started pressing out the half square triangle units. My half square triangle units are ready to trim, but these 4 patch blocks still need a little something. I'm going to be taking 2 of the units. I'm going to be putting them right sides together, making sure that seam is nesting. Once I have it nested well, I'm going to put a couple of pins to hold it in place. I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam away from the line on both sides. Well, I should have drawn this line before I ever started pinning. That would have been smarter. Take half of your 4 patch units that you're going to make and draw this vertical line that you're about to see me draw. I'm lining up a horizontal line on my ruler with that seam line that I already stitched, and I'm drawing a line. This is going to get me a nice 90-degree angle for my blocks. It's a lot easier to draw a line without a pin getting in the way of your ruler, but I managed to make it work. With all these pins involved, I'm definitely not going to be chain piecing. I'm going to stitch down one side of the line, then just flip the unit around, stitch down the other side of the line, taking my pins out as I go. When I got to the end of this 4 patch stack, I cut the units apart on the line that I had drawn. Next, I pressed the 4 patch units open. I'm doing that assembly line pressing again, where I leave the iron sitting on the first block and I get the second block ready to go. Now it's time to square up my little blocks. I'm going to start with the 4 patches. I'm going to be squaring these 4 patches to 4-inch blocks. To do that, I'm going to lay my ruler down. I'm going to line up the 2 middle lines, the stitch lines, with 2-inch marks on my ruler. So vertically and horizontally, I'm lining up on that 2-inch line going through the middle of the block. Then I flip the unit around, line up again at 4 inches on the left and the bottom, and 2 inches in the middle. To square up the half square triangles, it's similar, but I'm using the diagonal line on my ruler, putting that over my seam line, I'm trimming off the top and the right, making sure that this block is going to end up larger than 4 inches, and then I flip it around the other way, keep that diagonal seam lined up with my diagonal ruler line, and trim it back down to 4 inches. I'm going to be making 2 6 patches out of these blocks, and they're going to be reversed. So I'm going to make 1 6 patch that is looking one way or pointing one way, and then the opposite. There is a really good spot in this video coming up where you'll be able to take a screenshot when I have the blocks laid out in the 2 patches, the 2 different 6 patches next to each other. So I'll let you know when that moment comes by, and you can take a screenshot if you like. It is really a mind-bending experience laying these blocks out the way I did, but I am really trying to get the look of that antique quilt without the sashing. I didn't want to do these sashed Jacob's Ladder blocks. I wanted to get the look without all the work. Here is that spot where I've got these 6 patches laid out. Now, I could have done these in 12 patches, but based on the number of charm packs I was using, that didn't give me the flexibility that I needed for the size I was making. If you were making a much larger quilt, you could probably make this as a 12 patch and then just flip them around different ways. I continued stacking up my little half square triangle units and my little 4-patch units, trying to keep straight where I was. I did pretty good. I had to actually count out loud so I could remember where I was. I've got a couple of examples from my Electric Quilt 8 program here. This first example is a little bit larger layout, and then the second example is the layout I'm doing, which is a baby quilt size. Well, let's get sewing. I'm going to stitch these together 2 at a time, 2 at a time, 2 at a time, and then put the 3 little rows together to get my 6 patches, and then I'll be laying out the blocks and get this quilt put together. This little sticky note shows my 6-patch layer. I've got block 1, block 2, that means a 6-patch. Got 1 on the left and number 2 is on the right, and I've got that laid out in a 3 by 4 layout. So I've got 4 going across and 3 going down. Here's a close-up of that purple sticky note again if you want a screenshot of that too. When I finished chain piecing 2 pieces together for both blocks, I laid everything out. What I need to do next is press the 2 units open, but I want to press the top row one way, the second row a different way, and the third way the same as the top. If I do it this way, I'm going to have an easier time nesting the seams between these rows. So for this first row on the right-hand side, I'm pushing it to the right-hand side. And I'm going to do all of those at one time, one at a time, so I'm pressing the same way for the whole stack. For that second row, I'm going to be doing the opposite. I'm going to be pressing towards the left. When I get to that third row, I'm pressing back towards the right-hand side again. Once everything was pressed and laid out according to my plan, I started putting the first row on the right together with the second row on the right. I'm nesting that seam in the middle, and I'm putting a clip right on top. Now, I didn't wait to add on the third row. I went ahead and clipped that on the same way and got all my seams ready to go before I went to the sewing machine. Sometimes I will go ahead and stitch that first seam before adding on that third row, for example, when I make a 9 patch, but today I just felt like getting it all clipped and then going to the sewing machine all at once. I've got a total of 12 blocks, 12 of these 6 patches to put together. I'm just stitching down one side, then I'm flipping the unit around and stitching that other side. Once I had all the 6 patches put together, it was time to get that purple sticky note out, put it right on the sewing machine in front of me, and put these 12 blocks together in the right order. Once I had the 12 blocks all put together, I pressed this little quilt top nice and flat. I'm going to be adding a border to give it a little extra something. I went through my stash and found about a third or a half a yard of this pretty blue. I pressed it nice and flat, and then I trimmed the yardage into 4-inch strips. This little baby quilt was small enough that I did not have to join the pieces together to go around the quilt. One piece of this 4-inch strip was enough for each side. When I got all the way around the quilt, I did trim some excess bulk from the seams. Next, I pressed the border nice and flat. The last thing I did was square up all 4 corners. Well, it's time to take a look at this finished baby quilt. I do really like the way this turned out with 2 colors. And those arrows in the middle that this pattern forms when you put the blocks together, I wonder if there's a way, there probably is, of course, there's a way, but making those arrows a separate color, a third color, wouldn't that be interesting? I hope that watching me take inspiration from an antique quilt and trying to make it into something just a little bit different has given you some ideas to work with, some things that maybe you want to try. Let me know what you think in the comments or what you might try. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.